Welcome to this exam skills screencast for component 3 of the A-level sociology exam. And what I'm going to do in this particular video is walk you through the component 3 exam paper and explain what I would be thinking if I was tackling this specimen examination paper for the unit. And the purpose of this particular exercise is to get you to mentally rehearse the things that you should be thinking and your examination technique before you get into the exam. Let's start by looking at the front cover of this particular exam, so we can see that this is the third and final component, and that the title of this paper is called Power and Stratification. And what you need to know is that this particular paper has two sections. Section A is on social differentiation and stratification, so that's the work that we've done on social inequality within the UK, and then section B is the section looking at world sociology. You can see that this paper is 2.5 hours long, and it accounts for 40% of your final A-level grade. And obviously with an exam of this length, one of the things that I would be thinking is that time management is obviously crucial. And this is what the rest of the front cover of the examination paper will look like. So you'll be given your exam paper and a 12-page answer booklet. And remember that my advice with this particular answer booklet is not to cross anything out. And also, when you have finished a particular question, start the next question on a new page. The advantage of doing that is if you have any time left at the end of the exam, if you've got some space underneath a question and you can think of some additional information to include, then it's easy to add it if you've left a gap between each particular question. Instructions to candidates: you have to answer section A, and there are two parts to section A, as we'll see in a minute, a 20-mark question and a 40-mark question. And then, as we see when we look at the paper, within section B there are actually 4 options, and you only do the world sociology option. And again, there's a 20-mark question and a 40-mark question on section B. And as we can see down here, section A and section B have an equal weighting. There are the same amount of marks available for each section, so you should try and spend roughly the same amount of time on each section of the exam. In other words, an hour and 15 minutes on section A, and then an hour and 15 minutes on section B. So what you can see on this particular slide is the layout for section A of the exam. So what we're seeing on the screen at the moment is the specimen examination paper produced by the exam board for this particular unit. And as I've just mentioned, I recommend that you spend an hour and 15 minutes in total on this particular section. And the way in which I would divide up that time is I would spend about 20 to 25 minutes on 1A, that's the 20-mark question, and then I would spend around about 50 to 55 minutes on the 40-mark question. So let's begin by looking at 1A. So if we just read through the question together, it says identify evidence of social class inequality in 2 areas of life in the contemporary UK. So let's just break down this question. The first instruction is to identify evidence. So what the examiners are expecting your answer to contain in terms of evidence are named studies and statistics. Your answer can't just be based on anecdotes or personal experience. It's got to contain proper pieces of sociological evidence. Then the question specifies the type of inequality that you need to focus on. So in the specimen question, it's social class inequality, and you've got to identify evidence of social class inequality in 2 areas of life. Now, in the revision notes that I've given you to help you prepare for this particular question, the two areas of life that you need to focus on are politics and the media. And the instruction also is to look at the contemporary UK. So that means that the evidence that you use in your answer needs to be reasonably up to date. It can't be too historical. Now, what you can see on the screen at the moment is a model answer written by Daisy to the specimen question on social class inequality that we've just looked at on the examination paper. And this particular answer, I think, would get full marks, and it's laid out in exactly the way that examiners are looking for. So if you just hit the pause button and just have a read through this particular answer, and if we look at the structure of this answer together, the first two paragraphs are looking at social class inequality within the field of politics. And for each area of life, you need to look at two pieces of evidence, and you need to write a paragraph on each piece of evidence. So you need to describe the evidence of class inequality, and then at the end of your paragraph, you need very explicitly to explain how the evidence that you've just described demonstrates evidence of class inequality. So we can see this again with the second paragraph, and then the third and the fourth paragraph, it's the same structure, but this time we're focusing on the other area of life, the media. So again, here's one piece of evidence described. At the end of the paragraph, we've got a clear explanation of how that evidence demonstrates class inequality, and then the same structure at the end of the answer. And remember, you can find the raw material that you need for this particular question in this particular handout that I've already given you on the 20-mark question. And I've condensed the evidence from that handout into a series of Brainscape flashcards like the one that you can see on the screen at the moment. Remember that the 20-mark question is the most predictable question on any of the exam papers. There are only a limited number of questions that could come up on this particular section, and there's another screencast that I've made that will give you further information about this 20-mark question. Right, let's now return to the examination paper, and let's move on to the 40-mark question. And as you can see on the specimen exam question, you will be given a choice on this particular section of the exam. So you only do either 1B or 1C. Remember that I recommend that you spend about 50 to 55 minutes on this section of the exam, and that includes your thinking and planning time, and you should definitely do a plan for this longer answer. And also, obviously, you need your time to make your mind up about which of these two questions is going to be your strongest. So I'm going to imagine that I'm going to do 1B. The command word we can see in 1B is evaluate, and what that means is that I can't just describe the theory that's in the question. That in addition to outlining and describing the theory, I've got to devote a significant amount of time in my answer to a thorough evaluation of the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. So this question's asking me to evaluate the usefulness of Weberian explanations of inequality. Now, if you get a question that's about Weberian explanations, you can focus both on the work of Max Weber, but also it would be a good idea to also look at neo-Weberian views within your answer as well. And the same would be true if you got a question on Marxist explanations of inequality, once again, you can look at both the traditional Marxist perspective, but also include some analysis of neo-Marxist explanations in your answer as well. So what I would be thinking in the exam, when I'm planning my answer, is that probably a 5-part essay structure will work for this type of question. So I need an introduction, then I need a section where I clearly describe and outline the Weberian explanations of inequality, and then, because the command word is evaluate, I need to look at the strengths and weaknesses of those explanations. So when you're asked to evaluate the usefulness of a theory, you need to look at both the good and the bad points about that particular explanation. And then finally, I need a conclusion as well to round off my answer. By the way, this other type of question, 1C, where you're being asked to evaluate sociological explanations of gender inequality, sociological explanations just means theories. And in this type of question, I would recommend that you look at maybe 3 or 4 explanations of gender inequality. So if I was doing this question rather than the other one, I might outline and then evaluate the traditional biological explanations of gender inequality, and then look at several different versions of feminism. So liberal feminism, Marxist feminism, and radical feminism, again outlining the theories and also looking at some of their strengths and weaknesses. So to be fully prepared for the 40-mark question on section A of the exam, it's really important to master all of the theories of social inequality. And the theories that are specified on the specification are functionalism, the new right, Marxism and neo-Marxism, the Weberian and neo-Weberian explanations, and feminism and postmodernism. And in relation to feminism, it's important to talk about feminism not just in general terms, but also identify the main types of feminism, liberal, Marxist, and radical feminism. And if you want some extra help in getting to grips with these theories, then obviously you can rewatch the screencasts. But also if you go on to the iLearn site and you look at this section, a guide to the exams and technique, you'll find an electronic version of the revision checklist handout that I've given you that's got all of the flashcards and concise revision notes on the main theories of social inequality. Remember that the other main type of question that comes up on this section of the paper are questions asking you to evaluate sociological explanations of either class inequality, gender inequality, ethnic or age inequality. And because I think some of you have been doing exams and have not been able to come to all of the lessons recently, you might have missed some of the handouts that I've given you on explanations of ethnic inequalities and age inequalities, and this one also includes a model answer. So you can find these in handouts also on iLearn. And remember to look out for what I call the hidden theory questions when you look at the wording of the 40-mark question. So these are questions that don't actually mention the name of a theory in the wording of the question, but it should be fairly obvious which type of theory lies behind these types of questions. So if we look at the first question, the idea that social inequality is inevitable and functional, really the main theory that lies behind this question is of course the functionalist perspective. And also I think you could also look at the new right perspective that would support many of the functionalist arguments about the beneficial consequences of inequality. Any question that's talking about the basis of inequality being patriarchy, then really the theories that lie behind this question are the feminist approaches. This question, the view that all inequality is essentially class inequality, I think is really about Marxism. It's this kind of Marxist idea that we can relate all forms of inequality back to class and back to capitalism. It's about the economic determinism that underpins Marxism. And this final question, this idea that inequality is linked to class, status and party, hopefully you recognise that these are the key concepts that Max Weber used to analyse inequality. Okay, going back to the exam paper, after section A there is section B, and we can see this instruction to answer one of the following options. So on your exam paper you will be given 4 options. You only do option 4, which we'll see in a minute is the world sociology section. So completely ignore the sections on crime, the sections on health, ignore the section on power and politics, and then you just focus on this option on world sociology. So here we can see the layout for the world sociology section of component 3. Remember that you need to spend 1 hour and 15 minutes on this section of the exam, so half of your available time. And again, I would recommend about 20 to 25 minutes on the 20 marker and then 50 to 55 minutes on the longer 40 mark question. So if we have a look at the 20 mark question first of all, it says that Western intervention in the developing world is ethnocentric. So this question will start with a claim. So the claim is that Western intervention in the developing world is ethnocentric. And what you need to do in your first paragraph is briefly decode the claim. So explain what the claim actually means. So you would need to define the term ethnocentrism. So ethnocentrism is about being culturally biased, and in relation to world sociology, it's the view that poorer countries have got to become more like us. And then this idea of Western intervention, this can refer to any form of Western involvement in a developing country. So it could be about the aid that is given to the developing world, it could be about trading relationships, it could be about the involvement of transnational corporations, or it could be about the idea of colonialism, because obviously that was a form of Western intervention in the developing world that has had significant long-term consequences. And of course dependency theorists would argue that we now have a form of neo-colonialism. So make sure that you read through the claim and then you explain what the claim means in the opening paragraph of your answer, and then you're being asked to explain why many sociologists hold this view. So what you've got to do in the main body of your answer is give 3 to 4 arguments that support this particular claim. You don't need to argue against the claim in the 20 mark question, you just need 3 or 4 arguments that are in favour of the view being stated in the question, and you need to make sure that you fully develop and explain each of those arguments in a separate paragraph. So what I would be thinking in the exam is that my final answer to this 20 mark question is going to be about 4 to 5 paragraphs. Then we've got the longer 40 mark question, and just like section A, we've got a choice here. So we're not doing both of these questions, we're either doing B or C, so just one of these questions. And I'm going to imagine that I've decided to do question B, and question B says evaluate the usefulness of Marxist explanations of global inequalities. So again we can see that the command word is evaluate, so it's not enough to simply explain Marxist explanations of global inequalities. We've got to do that, but we've also got to look at the strengths and weaknesses of these explanations. Marxist explanations of global inequalities, the main Marxist explanations of global inequalities are dependency theory and world systems theory. And if I was answering this particular question, one of the things that I would need to do in the introductory section of my essay would be to link the Marxist theory to dependency theory and world systems theory. So if you hit the pause button and read through the 2 paragraphs that you can see on this particular slide, you can see how I would introduce a world sociology essay on the Marxist perspective by linking Marxism to dependency theory and world systems theory. And then after that type of introduction, linking Marxism to dependency theory and world systems theory, then I think I would mainly focus on dependency theory, and in section 2 I would explain that perspective, and then I would look at the strengths and the weaknesses, the criticisms of dependency theory, and that's because the question is asking me to evaluate, so I've got to make sure that I look at strengths and weaknesses. I can't just explain the theory. And then I would include a section towards the end of my answer briefly looking at world systems theory and looking at how world systems theory has developed and amended dependency theory. And then I'd include a conclusion. And by the way, command words like evaluate, assess or discuss all mean essentially the same thing. They all mean that the examiner wants you to go beyond merely explaining a theory or a viewpoint and to also weigh up the strengths and weaknesses or arguments for and against. Now, as with section A of the exam, mastering the main theories, I think, needs to be a key priority in terms of your revision, because if you understand the world sociology theories, you can answer pretty much any 40-mark question, because either the 40-mark question is going to be on a theory, or if it's on a topic like aid or education or urbanization, for example, you can simply apply your understanding of the theories to that particular topic. So one of the things that I've added to this section of iLearn is a handout that contains really concise revision notes on the main world sociology theories and also a model answer that makes use of the world sociology theories. The model answer shows you how you can use each of the main theories for a very general 40-mark question on inequalities in the developing world. And finally, remember that the best way of revising to any type of exam is to test yourself as much as possible. So make sure that you're using the Brainscape revision cards for world sociology and social differentiation and stratification, because these cards will help you to test yourself on the most likely examination questions.